I still remember the red dress before I noticed anything else. It caught the light like it was alive, burning against the gold glow of the ballroom chandeliers. When she walked past, the room shifted with her. Conversations paused, laughter softened. Even the jazz music felt like it bent to her pace. Isabelle Rowan, CEO. The woman everyone at Rowan Industries feared saying the wrong thing to. The woman who could end a career with a look. I wasn't supposed to be noticed there. I stood near the edge of the ballroom, half in shadow, holding a plain glass of water while everyone else floated by with champagne flutes. My suit was clean but simple. My shoes were polished but worn at the seams. I wasn't there to impress. I was there because attendance was mandatory. My mind wasn't on the gala, the crystal chandeliers, or the power games swirling around the room. It was on my daughter, Maddie. She would already be asleep, her small chest rising and falling under the quilt her mother had sewn before everything broke. My neighbor was watching her tonight, and every minute I stayed here felt borrowed. I don't drink, not anymore. Not since the night my wife never made it home. One phone call had turned my life into something unrecognizable. A drunk driver, wet pavement, headlights, silence. Since then, every bubble in a champagne glass felt like a warning. I stayed sober because Maddie needed a father who was steady, who came home every night, who didn't vanish. Across the room, Isabelle moved like she owned the night. Her red gown shimmered as if stitched from fire. People leaned toward her when she smiled. They laughed when she laughed, even if nothing was funny. Everything about her felt controlled, calculated, perfect. At first, the change was so small most people ignored it. A slight stumble that she covered with a quick laugh. A glass lifted too fast, champagne spilling just enough to glisten on her wrist. No one commented. No one wanted to see it. Isabelle Rowan was not supposed to falter, but I saw it. As the night deepened, her steps lost their rhythm. The confidence that usually wrapped her like armor began to thin. Her laugh sharpened, uneven at the edges. The fire in her dress flickered differently now, less command and more fatigue. By midnight, she stood near the edge of the ballroom, one hand brushing the marble doorframe like it was the only thing holding her up. For the first time, the woman everyone feared looked human. Around her, people pretended not to notice. Heads turned away. Conversations restarted too loudly. Acknowledging her weakness meant risking their own safety, so they chose silence. I stayed still, my grip tightening around the water glass. I knew that slope too well. I had lived at the bottom of it. I had stood in the rain at a funeral, holding a baby who would never remember her mother's voice. I had promised myself that night that alcohol would never again touch my world. Isabelle was unraveling, and everyone was letting it happen. I didn't want to be involved. I wanted to go home, but my feet wouldn't move. The room thinned as guests slipped out, eager to disappear before the night could stain them by association. The chandeliers still burnt bright, but the air felt hollow. Isabelle remained, alone now, her glass trembling slightly in her hand. She tried to walk toward the exit and missed her step. Her heel scraped the marble. She reached for the wall again. That was it. I set my empty glass on a tray and straightened. My heart beat faster, not from attraction, but from recognition. I wasn't special. I wasn't brave. I just knew what it meant when no one stepped forward. I crossed the distance slowly, keeping my voice low when I spoke. "Ma'am, do you need a ride?" She turned, eyes glassy, trying to place me. Her mouth curved into a strained smile. "Archer," she said, using my last name like a shield. "Yes," I answered calmly. "Let me drive you home. It's late. It's not safe." Her pride flared even through the haze. "I don't need help," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the valet area, now empty. "I have drivers." "Not tonight," I said, gentle but firm. "Please trust me." For a long moment she stared at me, not as a boss, not as a CEO, just a woman weighing whether to fall alone. Then she sighed, frustrated, exhausted, and let her hand fall from the wall. She didn't argue again. I stayed close as we walked toward the exit, her steps uneven but steadier beside me. Beneath the chandeliers that had watched her rule the room, Isabelle Rowan leaned slightly into my quiet presence. For the first time that night, she wasn't untouchable. And I knew, without understanding why, that the night was about to change both our lives. The night air hit us the moment we stepped outside, sharp and clean after hours of perfume and champagne. Isabelle paused at the curb like the ground beneath her wasn't fully reliable. The red of her dress looked darker now under the streetlights. Less fire, more ember. "My car," she said, squinting towards the valet area. "There's no one left," I replied gently. "Mine's right here." She looked at my sedan like it had personally offended her. Fabric seats, a small scratch on the door, no driver waiting, no tinted glass to hide behind. This was not her world. Still, she slid into the passenger seat without another word. The door closed with a soft thud that felt final. I buckled in and pulled away from the curb, the hotel shrinking in the mirror as downtown Chicago stretched ahead of us. For a few blocks, neither of us spoke. The engine hummed. A loose coin rattled in the cup holder. The silence was intense. It was unfamiliar. She leaned her head against the window, watching the light smear across the glass. "Everyone thinks nights like this are glamorous," she said quietly. "Power, applause, control." She let out a small laugh that had no humor in it. "It's lonely." I kept my eyes on the road. Loneliness doesn't care how big your office is. She turned toward me, surprised by my tone, curious. "And you?" she asked. "What's your excuse for standing in corners with water?" I tightened my grip on the wheel. "I have a daughter," I said. "She deserves a father who comes home steady." She waited. I could feel it. So I told her. About Emily. About the rain. About the phone call that split my life in two. I told her how alcohol stopped being a drink and became a marker, a reminder of what one careless choice can steal. By the time I finished, the city felt quieter. Isabelle didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to fill the space. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. "I'm sorry," she said. Not like an executive offering condolences, like a woman who meant it. The rest of the drive passed in a fragile calm. When we reached her building, the doorman glanced at us, startled, then wisely said nothing. I guided her inside, my arms steady as the marble floors reflected our steps. The elevator ride felt longer than it was. Her penthouse opened into glass and light. The view was breathtaking, but the space felt cold, too perfect, too quiet. "Sit," I said, easing her onto the sofa. I filled a glass with water and set it in front of her. She stared at it like it was something rare. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You could have left." "Because someone should have stayed," I answered. That was enough. I left her there with the water and the silence she needed. I didn't wait for thanks. I didn't ask for anything. I went home to my daughter and read her a story while the city slept. The next morning, I expected nothing to be different. I was wrong. Rowan Industries hummed like always. Meetings, deadlines, whispered ambition in every hallway. I settled into my seat unnoticed as usual. Then the assistant appeared at my desk. "Mr. Archer, Miss Rowan wants to see you." The room went quiet. I walked into her office ready for anything. Reprimand, warning, forgetting my place. She looked up from behind her desk, composed, sharp, fully herself again. But her eyes were different. "Thank you," she said, "for last night." I nodded. "You're welcome." She studied me for a moment, then leaned back. "You didn't pretend it didn't happen. You didn't tell anyone. You didn't disappear." "I did what was right," I said. From that day on, things shifted. In meetings, she asked for my input, listened, really listened. She asked about Maddie, remembered her name. The office noticed. Whispers followed me down hallways. I ignored them. What mattered was this quiet understanding between us, built on trust, on respect, on one night neither of us would ever forget. And somehow, without either of us saying it out loud, I realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. At first, I told myself not to read into it. People noticed everything at Rowan Industries. Every pause in a meeting, every glance exchanged too long. Isabelle Rowan asking for my opinion was enough to make the office buzz, but I kept my head down. I still arrived early. I still left on time. Maddie still waited for me at home with her arms open and her questions ready. But things don't shift quietly without reason. Isabelle started finding excuses to call me into her office that had nothing to do with reports or numbers. Sometimes it was a draft she wanted reviewed. Sometimes it was a question she already knew the answer to. Each time, her tone stayed professional, but her eyes searched my face like she was listening to something beneath my words. She stopped drinking at company events. People noticed that too. One afternoon, she surprised me by asking, "Do you ever take time for yourself?" I didn't know how to answer that. My time had a name: Maddie. Everything else came second. She nodded like she understood. I think she did. The walls around her didn't vanish all at once. Isabelle Rowan had spent a lifetime building them, but they lowered, brick by careful brick. She asked about Emily one evening, not in pity, not in curiosity, but with respect. When I spoke, she didn't rush me. She didn't soften her voice out of obligation. She simply listened. And somehow, she started sharing too. She told me about her childhood, about learning early that kindness didn't keep the lights on, about believing that control was the only way to stay safe. Power had been her armor long before she wore designer dresses and signed contracts worth more than my apartment building. One evening, she asked me to walk with her after work. The city glowed as the sun sank between skyscrapers, Chicago painted in gold and shadow. For once, there was no car waiting for her, no assistant hovering nearby. Just us, stepping into the street like two ordinary people. We walked without rushing, without agenda. When her hand brushed mine, I almost pulled away. Habit, caution. But she reached again, deliberate, her fingers sliding into mine with quiet certainty. It felt simple. It felt terrifying. I hadn't held someone's hand like that since Emily. Grief doesn't just fade. It waits, it watches, and it questions every step forward like a betrayal. Isabelle didn't rush me. She didn't squeeze tighter. She simply walked beside me, matching my pace, letting the city roar around us while something quiet settled between us. "Daniel," she said softly, using my first name like it mattered. "I don't want to hide anymore." I stopped walking, turned to face her. "I can't give you something halfway. I have a daughter. I have scars." She nodded. "I know. That's why I trust you." Trust. The word landed heavier than any promise. I told Maddie about her the next night, in the careful way parents do, as someone kind, someone important. Maddie listened with wide eyes, then asked if she liked pancakes. I laughed harder than I had in years. The real test came sooner than I expected. A project failed. Millions lost. The board circled Isabelle like sharks. I watched her stand tall in that meeting room, calm, but alone. When eyes turned to me, questioning my influence, she met my gaze and nodded once. I spoke up, not to protect her power, but to protect her truth. I told them what leadership looked like when no one was watching, when mistakes were faced, not buried, when courage wasn't loud. The room shifted. That night, she came to my apartment, not as a CEO, not dressed in armor, just Isabelle. Maddie was already asleep. The living room was small, warm, lived in. Isabelle sat on my couch and let out a long breath like she had been holding it for years. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Neither do I, but we don't have to know everything." She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time the distance between us disappeared. When she kissed me, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't fueled by loneliness alone. It was careful, honest, like two people checking the ground before stepping forward. Later, after she left, I stood in Maddie's doorway and listened to her breathe. I thought about how fragile happiness can be, how brave it is to try again. The next morning at work, Isabelle didn't pretend to forget. She didn't hide. She didn't announce anything either. But when she passed my desk, her hand brushed my shoulder, steady and intentional. And I knew then, whatever this was, it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And I was all in. Love doesn't arrive loud when you've lived through loss. It arrives quietly, careful not to scare you away. That was how it unfolded between Isabelle and me. No headlines, no gossip confirmed, just small moments stacked on top of each other until they became something solid. She met Maddie on a Sunday morning. Isabel stood in my doorway without the red dress, without the armor, jeans, a sweater, nervous hands. Maddie studied her the way children do, honest and unafraid. "Do you like pancakes?" Maddie asked. Isabel smiled, real and unpracticed. "I love them." That was all it took. They sat at the small kitchen table, batter on their fingers, laughter filling spaces that grief had once claimed. I watched from the stove, my chest tight, realizing this was the moment I had been protecting my heart from. Not fear, hope. From that day on, Isabel learned a different kind of power. She learned that bedtime stories mattered more than boardrooms, how showing up mattered more than control. She learned that silence could be safe, that love didn't need applause. And I learned too. I learned that moving forward wasn't betrayal, that Emily would never be replaced, only honored by the life I continued to build. I learned that love could return softer, steadier, shaped by patience rather than fire. At work, Isabel changed Rowan Industries. Not overnight, not magically, but meetings became less about fear and more about truth. Mistakes were owned, voices were heard, and no one dared question why Daniel Archer now had a seat at the table. We never denied our relationship. We never advertised it either. When asked, Isabel simply said, "He showed up when no one else did." That was enough. The night that changed everything returned to me often. The glittering ballroom, the red dress, the glass of water. I realized something then. Saving someone doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like staying sober, like holding a door, like not walking away. Months later, we stood on a quiet pier near Lake Michigan. Maddie chased seagulls, her laughter carried by the wind. Isabel stood beside me, her hand in mine, no fear left in her grip. "I used to think strength meant standing alone," she said. "Now I know it means letting someone stand with you." I nodded, watching my daughter, watching our future take shape in simple moments. Isabelle Rowan was still powerful, still respected, but now she was also seen, loved, grounded. And me? I wasn't just a single dad scraping by anymore. I was a man who chose kindness when it would have been easier to walk away. A man who learned that hope sometimes waits in the most unexpected places, like a red dress at midnight, like a glass of water, like the woman who didn't pretend to forget.